Welcome back to our 5-minute guides to the Bible. This is session 3 and it's Dr. Michael Bogart. We'll be talking today about the canon of the Holy Bible. In our last session, we learned that more than 40 authors contributed to the books of the Christian Bible, like Moses, David, Isaiah, Peter, Paul, Matthew, and so on. We also discovered that there are two schools of thought about when the books were written. Traditionalists accept the ancient view that the books were written between 1400 BC and 100 AD. And on the other hand, modernists opt for significantly later dates. Okay, with that running start, we can move on to learn about the canon, or more precisely, the canons of the Bible. So what is the canon? The term canon is simply the list of official books of the Bible as accepted by Jews and Christians. But there are several slightly different canons of the Bible. For example, Protestants accept the 66-book canon of the Bible with 39 books in the Old Testament and 27 books in the New Testament. Jews have a canon that corresponds to the 39 books of the Protestant Old Testament. And by the way, Christians got the Old Testament from the Jews. Only Jews don't call their Bible the Old Testament. For them, it's called the Hebrew Scriptures, or the Tanakh, Tanakh stands for Torah, Genesis through Deuteronomy, Nevi'im, the prophets, and Ketubim, the other writings, which are all the other books. So T-N-K, Tanakh. Roman Catholicism recognizes a canon of 73 books. They accept the same 27 New Testament books as all other Christian groups do, but they have 46 Old Testament books. And of course, they use the same 39 Old Testament books that Protestants use, but they also include 7 other books called the Apocrypha. Eastern Orthodox Christians accept all the books that Roman Catholics recognize, but they add 2 other books to the Apocrypha, as well as several other bits and pieces for a 9-book Apocrypha and a grand total of 75 books. Okay, so that gives an overview of the main canons of the Bible. I'll do another session on the canons of what I call the alternative Christianities, like Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses, what are commonly called the cults. These groups are outside historic Christianity, so they're really a separate discussion. One last thing in this session. What is the Apocrypha? The Apocrypha collection are books of Jewish origin that were written in the years between the last prophets of the 400s BC and the time of Christ in the 1st century AD. They include books like 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Maccabees, Tobit, Judith, and Sirach. The books in the collection were used by some, but not all, Jews during that period. They were never a part of the original Hebrew Old Testament. But in the mid-200s, the Hebrew Old Testament was translated into Greek for people who could not read Hebrew. And at that time, the translators made the decision, for whatever reason, to include the books of the Apocrypha into that translation called the Septuagint. When Christianity came along, Christians continued to use the Old Testament alongside the New Testament, but since so many Christians were of Gentile and not Jewish origin, they tended to use the Greek Septuagint version of the Old Testament to go along with the Greek New Testament. And later, this Greek Bible was translated into a Latin version by the Roman Catholic Church called the Vulgate. So the Latin Bible translation used throughout the Middle Ages contained the apocryphal books. But when Protestantism came along in the 1500s, Protestant leaders wanted a fresh start Christianity without all of the medieval customs and overlays of the Roman Catholic Church. So among the many changes they made was to go back to the original Hebrew Old Testament without the Apocrypha. So for what Christians call the Old Testament, Jews and Protestants have the books of the original Hebrew Bible. Catholics and Orthodox Christians have the collection used by the Greek Septuagint. In our next session, we'll be looking at how the 27 books of the New Testament were selected for the canon and why other books were excluded. This is Dr. Michael Bogart for the 5-Minute Guide to the Bible.